He refused to sign off on the tank. By evening, he outranked the man who pressured him to. September 1944. A field maintenance depot, somewhere behind Third Army's advancing lines, Lorraine, France. Grease coats Corporal Frank Delgado's hands as he runs his palm along the track tension of an M4 Sherman parked at the edge of the maintenance yard, one of a dozen tanks scheduled for immediate return to frontline service. The vehicle in front of him carries fresh paint over a hastily patched hull, repairs completed overnight by exhausted maintenance crews working to keep pace with an armoured advance that consumes tanks nearly as fast as replacements arrive. An officer stands nearby, clipboard in hand, waiting for Delgado's signature on the release form, the final authorization needed before this tank rejoins its unit at the front. Delgado does not sign. He has found something in the track assembly that troubles him, a stress fracture beginning to form where repeated combat damage and hasty overnight repair have weakened a critical connection point. To the officer standing beside him, anxious to meet an ambitious return-to-service quota that headquarters has been pushing hard, the tank looks combat-ready. To Delgado, whose hands have spent 3 years learning exactly what failure looks like before it happens, the tank is a death sentence waiting to unfold on some muddy French road, likely at the worst possible moment, likely with men inside who are trusting their lives to exactly the kind of judgment call he is being pressured to abandon. This is the story as it has circulated for years in the mythology surrounding General George S. Patton's Third Army. A story about a corporal who refused to certify a tank as fit for combat, despite pressure from a superior officer, and who found himself by that evening wearing sergeant's stripes after Patton himself learned what had happened. Before going further, it's worth being honest about something. No single verified primary source, no dated general order, no official unit record preserved in military archives confirms this specific incident occurred exactly as it is popularly told. Like several other stories that circulate about Patton and his relationship with enlisted men, this one exists in that particular category of military folklore, repeated often enough and with enough conviction that it has become part of the broader legend surrounding Third Army, even though rigorous historical verification of this precise exchange remains elusive. What we can document with confidence is the genuine maintenance crisis that Third Army's armoured divisions faced during exactly this period, and understanding that real crisis explains why a story like this one resonates so powerfully with anyone who understands what Patton's tank crews actually experienced during the autumn campaign of 1944. Patton's Third Army had advanced with extraordinary speed following the Normandy breakout, but that speed came at a brutal mechanical cost. Sherman tanks, engineered for reliability and mass production rather than the kind of individual craftsmanship that characterized German armor, nonetheless required constant maintenance to sustain the operational tempo Patton's aggressive offensive doctrine demanded. Official US Army maintenance records from this period, extensively studied by military historians examining Third Army's logistics, document extraordinary strain on forward maintenance depots, with crews working around the clock to repair combat damage, replace worn components, and return vehicles to service fast enough to sustain an advance that was consuming armor at a pace peacetime planning had never fully anticipated. This created exactly the kind of institutional pressure the popular story describes. Commanders desperate for every available tank, maintenance officers under pressure to meet return-to-service quotas, and the individual mechanics and crew chiefs, whose hands-on technical judgment represented the only real check against sending mechanically compromised vehicles back into combat. Patton's documented command philosophy placed enormous emphasis on maintaining tank strength and operational readiness, understanding with the clarity of an experienced armor officer that his entire offensive doctrine depended on having enough functional tanks available at the point of attack. This created genuine tension within his command between the urgent need for more combat-ready vehicles and the equally urgent need to ensure those vehicles would not fail catastrophically once committed to battle. Multiple verified, well-documented accounts from officers and enlisted men who actually served under Patton describe his genuine and often surprising respect for technical expertise, even when that expertise came from junior enlisted ranks and even when it complicated his own operational timelines. Patton was known, through documented testimony preserved in numerous post-war interviews and unit histories, for personally inspecting maintenance operations, for asking pointed technical questions of the mechanics and crew chiefs responsible for keeping his tanks running, and for showing genuine appreciation for soldiers whose hands-on competence directly served his relentless operational demands. This documented aspect of Patton's actual leadership style explains precisely why a story featuring rapid recognition and reward for a mechanic's technical judgment feels entirely consistent with the general's known character, whether or not this exact incident can be verified against surviving documentation. If this promise of instant, thumbnail-worthy vindication is why you clicked, stick around, because we're going to look at exactly what was really happening in Third Army's maintenance yards that made a story like this one so believable to everyone who served there. And if these are the kinds of details you want more of, subscribe now, because this channel exists to find them. The broader significance of this recurring genre of Patton stories, junior soldiers whose technical accuracy or moral courage earns immediate recognition from a general famous for his exacting standards, reflects something genuinely important about how American armored maintenance culture actually functioned during the war, independent of whether any single anecdote survives rigorous historical scrutiny. American tank maintenance doctrine, unlike the more centralized and hierarchical approach that characterized German military culture, placed significant practical authority in the hands of individual crew chiefs and maintenance NCOs, whose direct hands-on assessment of a vehicle's mechanical condition carried genuine weight in determining whether that vehicle returned to combat service. This decentralized technical authority reflected a broader pattern in American military organization that consistently surfaces across documented wartime accounts. A willingness to trust demonstrated competence wherever it resided within the rank structure, over rigid hierarchical deference when lives and equipment were genuinely at stake. This stands in notable contrast to more rigid European military traditions, where technical decisions of this consequence often required approval from officers whose authority derived primarily from rank and commission rather than direct hands-on mechanical expertise. American forces, drawing on a cultural tradition that valued practical competence and had spent generations building an industrial economy dependent on skilled tradesmen and mechanics, extended genuine institutional trust to the enlisted men whose technical judgment kept increasingly complex mechanized forces operational under the brutal pressures of sustained combat. The recurring symbol embedded in this story, whether verified incident or evolved legend, is the wrench itself, the simple, unglamorous tool that represented the actual mechanical judgment standing between a combat-ready tank and a vehicle that might fail catastrophically at the worst possible moment. This wrench, wielded by mechanics and crew chiefs working exhausting hours in forward maintenance depots, symbolized something distinctly American about how the war's industrial abundance actually translated into battlefield capability. Not merely through the raw numbers of tanks American factories could produce, but through the maintenance culture and institutional trust that ensured those tanks, once repaired and returned to service, could actually be relied upon by the crews whose lives depended on their mechanical integrity. There is a larger truth worth reflecting on here, independent of whether this specific corporal to sergeant promotion occurred exactly as popularly described. It is the truth that Patton's Third Army, for all the general's famous demands for speed and aggression, ultimately depended on a maintenance culture that valued honest technical assessment over the kind of convenient optimism that might have kept quota numbers looking better on paper while sending compromised vehicles into combat. Whether or not a single mechanic's name and promotion date can be verified against surviving Army records, the broader truth this story gestures toward, that American armored forces succeeded in part because enlisted technical judgment was genuinely valued and, according to persistent institutional memory, sometimes rewarded with remarkable speed, reflects something authentically important about the culture that allowed Third Army to sustain its extraordinary operational tempo through months of brutal combat. If this story of quiet, decisive competence resonated with you, that's exactly the kind of history this channel is built to uncover. So hit subscribe now and join us for the next one, because there are dozens more stories like this waiting to be told.